Chapter 14. Lucy. Opening the front door, Lucy found she was right. "Hi." Tana grinned. "You look good. Are you ready to go?" She nodded, then shook her head. "1 minute. I have to grab my handbag." Leaving the door open, she dashed to her room. Grabbing her handbag, she shoved her lipstick and phone in before turning towards the door. Tana was in the doorway. She was relieved she'd pushed all the clothes into the wardrobe and made her bed earlier. I'm ready." "You don't need to say goodbye to your parents or anything?" She shook her head, crossing the room. "No, they're not here." Tana stepped back to let her out of the room. "When are they home?" She hesitated. "Tomorrow." She glanced up at Tana in time to see him grin. He took her hand, linking his fingers through hers. "I guess we better go or we'll miss the start of the movie." Lucy nodded, walking to the front door with him. Leaving the outside light on, she locked the door behind her, wishing she hadn't needed to let his hand go to do so. Once they were in the car, she tried to think of something to say to him. It had been so much easier to talk to him when he was giving her a lift home after school. She glanced towards him, still trying to figure out what to say. "Where are your parents?" Relieved to have something to talk about, she told him about her mum's friend giving them her prize of a weekend away. She probably went into far more detail than was necessary, in an effort not to let the conversation end. They arrived at the cinema with plenty of time to buy popcorn, before they made their way to their seats. Again an awkward silence fell between them, and she was glad when the movie started. Barely 10 minutes into the movie, her phone beeped to let her know a message had come through. She nearly groaned when she saw it was from Jasmine. "You having fun? Is the movie good? Are you holding hands yet? Are you sure I have to wait till Monday to find out any details?" She was tempted to ignore her friend, but guessed she'd probably keep sending messages until she acknowledged her. "I'll talk to you Monday. Stop messaging me. My battery is low on charge." Tana bent his head close to hers. "Everything okay?" "Yeah. It was only Jasmine." Tana grinned. "Was that a prearranged message in case you needed an excuse to escape a boring night?" "No. Just Jasmine being annoying." He laughed softly. "Are you sure? I do have a sister. I know some of the tricks she uses." She started to object, but thought he might think she was protesting too much. Feeling slightly embarrassed, she pulled up Jasmine's message and showed it to him. "See? Jasmine being annoying." The messages were less embarrassing than him thinking she'd planned an excuse to escape his company early in case he was boring. "Does that mean you want me to hold your hand?" She returned her phone to her handbag. She had no idea what to say, and on Monday she was going to tell Jasmine never to do this to her again. Sliding his fingers between hers, he clasped her hand lightly. He leaned even closer, his lips brushing against her ear. "You don't have to wait for me to hold your hand. Go ahead and hold mine whenever you want." She couldn't speak, wasn't even certain if she could breathe. Turning her head slightly, she met his gaze a moment before his lips met hers. By the time the movie was over, she couldn't have said what she'd watched. At the end of the movie, they walked out with an arm around each other's waist. Tana tossed the nearly full container of popcorn in the rubbish bin they passed. Once they were in the car, Tana asked, "Do you still have to be home by midnight?" She thought of the silent, empty house waiting for her. "I guess not. There's a party on, or we could go for a drive." Her voice trailed off. "You can plug your phone into the charger if you want." She shook her head. The battery wasn't that flat. It should last until she got home, as long as she didn't have to use it for more than a few minutes. Which did you want to do? Drive. We could go to a lookout. He grinned at her. She laughed, doubting they'd be doing much looking. We could go back to my place for a bit. Are you sure? She nodded. Just for a bit. The drive to her place was silent, and they sat in the car when Tanner pulled up and turned off the engine. She stared out the window, once again uncertain what to say. You sure? She looked towards him, trying to see his expression in the dim interior of the car. Yeah. Her voice was soft. Only for a little while. Okay. When he opened the car door, Lucy did too, waiting on the footpath for him as he walked around the front of the car. He reached for her hand as he stopped at her side, and she returned his smile. He stood staring down at her for a minute, and she wondered if she should say something. I'm glad you nearly ran into me on Tuesday. She couldn't resist smiling. That had been Jack's fault. Maybe that was what she'd needed help with. She'd have to suggest it to him. She almost laughed. He'd probably be pretty disgusted to even consider the help she'd needed was his matchmaking skills, limited though they were. I'm glad to. Tanner stared at her for another few seconds before he walked to the front door with her, his fingers still threaded through hers. When they reached the door, he let go of her hand. She wanted to protest. Instead, she took out her keys and unlocked the door. Her eyes were drawn to the stains on the concrete before she stepped inside. She'd forgotten all about them. She'd have to try and clean them off in the morning. After she locked the door behind them, she led the way to her room, hanging her handbag on the bedroom door rather than open her messy wardrobe and put it away. She stopped, not far inside, trying to think of something to say to him. Tanner nodded towards the vase. Who are the roses from? I don't know. She watched him carefully, trying to figure out if he was the one leaving them for her. She couldn't tell. A secret admirer? Grinning, he crossed the distance between them. I guess. She met his eyes, thoughts of roses and secret admirers evaporating at the look he gave her. She reached for him at the same time as he reached for her. Time became meaningless, and Tanner ended up staying a lot longer than a bit, leaving well after midnight. She stood at the front door, waving as he left. He was completely out of sight before she could bring herself to go inside, locking the front door behind her. The silence of the house pressed in around her, and she hurried to her room, grabbing her pajamas so she could have a shower. Her pajamas consisted of cotton shorts and a singlet, teddy bears and love hearts printed all over them. They'd been a Christmas present from Jasmine. Once she was dressed, she left the hallway light on and crawled into bed. She lay awake, thinking about the night. Was Tanner the one leaving her roses? She still didn't know. His expression hadn't changed when he'd asked about them or when she'd answered him. She really hoped someone admitted to it soon. She was dying of curiosity. 15 roses and not a single clue. It was starting to get annoying. Why didn't they tell her? Pushing that from her mind, she thought about her night instead, her lips curving into a smile. Maybe Tanner would want to come over tomorrow, before her parents returned home. She'd ring him when she woke.